It's Hollywood or history, unravel what they portray. Let's investigate, teaching truth, one frame at a time.
Welcome to the Hollywood or History Podcast, a podcast to help social studies teachers and teacher educators use film effectively in their classroom. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Roberts, and in each episode, we talk with a volume editor and lesson plan developer to determine the accuracy of their favorite films.
Hollywood or history, unravel what they portray. Let's investigate, teaching truth, one frame at a time.
Welcome to the Hollywood or History Podcast. This episode is about using film to teach about inequality and inequity through history. This is chronologically the third volume in the series. I'm here with Dr. Sarah Kaka and teacher Lucas George to talk about their contributions to this book. So, welcome, Sarah and George. Hope you all are having a great day.
So far, so good.
Perfect.
Good to see
I'm
you
about to get
guys.
even better with you.
Well, I am very, very happy to have you. This is really, Sarah, you were the third person or the first person to contact me after we decided to make this a series. The first two books were edited by myself and my colleague Charles Elfer, and you were the first person to kind of step up and say, I want to do something like this and set the stage for humble brag. What I think is an amazing. At now we're up to 11 volumes in this series, so welcome, and I'm glad to have y'all here today. So let's go and get started. Sarah, would you mind talking a little bit more about your background and what you do?
Sure. So, I first and foremost am a teacher by trade. So I taught high school social studies for 10 years in a few different places in the country before I decided to make the jump to higher ed. And I have now been in higher ed for, I think, 12, 13 years. I love teaching. I was trained by phenomenal teachers and teacher educators, and decided that that was kind of the direction I wanted to go, with my life as well. So I ended up getting my PhD from the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs. My degree is actually in ed leadership, research, and policy. So a lot of the work that I do is actually around, how do we teach teachers the best, right? What are the most effective way to teach pre-service teachers to then become really effective long-term educators who stay in the profession? I have been at Ohio Wesleyan University now. I finished my 8th year. I am the endowed chair in education. I'm the director of our middle and secondary teaching programs. I'm also the coordinator of curriculum for the university. And in all my spare time, I teach a few classes as well as part of my job. So, but I love what I do. I get to work with future teachers every day, on campus, but also in the classroom as well. I am lucky enough that my side hustle at the moment is that I'm the current president of the Ohio Council for Social Studies, which is not something I ever thought I was going to take on, but given kind of the where we are politically in Ohio and kind of where we're headed in the country, it's been really, really fun to kind of marry my leadership and policy background kind of along with teaching and supporting teachers here in Ohio. It's been a very, very interesting ride along this path for sure. So what else do I do? I am 2 years ago, in all my spare time, I started a consulting company with a couple of colleagues of mine. And so we do a lot of work with districts around inquiry-based education, which really marries so beautifully with what this book does as well. So, yeah, I could go on and on, but yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Well, great. Yeah, it's great having you. And we've worked together now for several years. It just shows that we can have unity. Even though I'm not from Michigan, I obviously live in Michigan now and worked in Michigan for 13 years. So if someone from Ohio and someone from Michigan can get along, it does happen. Now, I had no ancestors that fought in the world famous Toledo War, but I think we can overcome that. But yeah, it's great having you, Sarah. And again, I look forward to talking to you throughout this episode. Next, we have, and and this is great. I love having classroom teachers write in the series. And obviously, we've had several classroom teachers also appear on the podcast. Those folks are basically teaching every day. And then on top of this, they're like, oh, yeah, sure. I'll write a lesson plan in your book, or I'll appear on this podcast with all the hard work that teacher does. And we do have a teacher with us today. I promised him I would not get this mixed up. But if you've read the show notes wrong, you may think George Lucas, and we could not actually get George Lucas with us. But even better, we have a classroom teacher, eighth grade teacher. I'm a former eighth grade teacher myself, Lucas George. So, Lucas, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, there's no endeavor greater than following up Sarah introducing herself because she does so much stuff. And also, too, the name is true. That's why I was selected for the book
That's
because Sarah
accurate.
thought George
Yeah.
Lucas was applying. But my name's Lucas George. I have been born, raised, and educated in Ohio. So I grew up in Independence, Ohio. I had an amazing eighth grade American history teacher called Mr. McGinnis. I ended up going to Wittenberg University to get my undergraduate degree. And then I went to Ashland University to get my master's in American history and government. Interesting thing having my eighth grade teacher being my influence because I now teach eighth grade American history, which I will say to all listeners is the best grade to teach without a doubt. So I teach at Lakeview Junior High in Pickerington, Ohio, and I'm also the department chair there. Also, last semester too, I was an adjunct professor of education at my alma mater, Wittenberg University, for the social studies and methods course. I find myself in a lot of different pots too. So I'm on the Ohio Council for the Social Studies, serving under Sarah, of course. And I have been the legislative liaison for the past 6 years for that organization. And I've also helped create modules for African Americans, Arab Americans, and American Indians as well. My presentation experience is at OCSS and NCSS. I've presented on culture responsive pedagogy, ethnic studies, PBL, virtual simulations, and AI and social studies. And I've had a lot of great colleagues, mentors throughout the years, and been rewarded in a few accolades. In 2019, I was named a James Madison Fellow. In 2022, I was awarded the Gilder Learman Ohio History Teacher of the Year. 2024, I was the Ohio Sons of the American Revolution Teacher of the Year. So I've been very lucky to have smart people surrounding me, giving the impression that I know what I'm doing.
Well, I mean, that's amazing, and all those accolades are well deserved. We've met briefly before at NCSS, and again, I just appreciate that you taking the time from everything you do to contribute to a book series like this, and then certainly now that we have a podcast coming on, talk about the lesson plan that you helped develop for the book, or you developed for the book. So that's great. Off camera, we had a little conversation about, again, we talk a lot about football for some reason on this podcast. So Lucas is a Ohio State fan. Obviously, like I said, I've graduated from the University of Georgia, and just like I tell my students here in Michigan who are Michigan fans, it doesn't count unless you win two in a row. So just keep that in mind. But we will move on from football and talk about the important stuff. Sarah's amazing volume in the book series. So let's talk a little bit about the book, Inequality and Inequity. So Sarah, can you talk more about the book and just give the audience some more details about what actually the book is about?
Yeah. So when when the call came out for the book, well, for additional volumes in the series a few years ago, um, was that 2020? Oh my goodness, it was 5 years ago.
Yeah,
Yeah.
during COVID. During
That
COVID.
was that this was actually because I put this book together literally in 6 months because I was on sabbatical and my entire sabbatical project had fallen apart. This was going to be something I just kind of did on the side because it sounded really fun. But anyway, it became really like kind of the focus of my sabbatical, and I was able to really, what, 6 months I think this book came together. So anyway, when I saw the call for volumes for the series, I immediately thought at that point about kind of what what was going on in our country. A lot of the research I had been doing at that point was around teaching controversial issues, and how do we prepare pre-service teachers to kind of do that work, right? We knew that even at that point, back in 2020, that there was so much contention within our country, and so much polarization, and it was really important, I think, that that I take the work that we were doing around teaching controversial issues and figure out how can we do more, right? Versus just saying we need to do this. To me, it was really important to give teachers the tools to actually do that work and to do it effectively. And so I had been lucky enough to contribute to the world history volume, and really just fell in love with the process and the idea of using film to engage students, and trying to find ways to use film alongside primary sources to give teachers something to really grasp onto, to teach issues that might be kind of otherwise uncomfortable. And so the goal of the book really is to use film clips to engage students in historical inquiry around these issues of inequality and inequity, and issues that some teachers really were uncomfortable teaching. In the research I've been doing, I talked to a lot of different teachers, and in many cases, it was easier for them just to not talk about things that were uncomfortable, right? And I think that that's, now 5 years later, that is more true now than ever before, given the divisive issues legislation that have been enacted all over the country, and the anti DEI executive orders, right? And so, as I was looking back through this book in preparation for our conversation today, I realized just how much that like how relevant all of these lessons are today, probably now even more than they were 5 years ago when I first started kind of thinking through what the book would look like. Um, and so the book is it's got 30 lesson plans, fully developed inquiry-based lesson plans that integrate, clips of Hollywood films alongside primary and secondary sources, designed mostly, for 6th through 12th grade. But each lesson has, this very, very intentionally scaffolded analysis. They have graphic organizers, they have source evaluation, they have assessments, they have extension activities, right? So every lesson can be what the teacher needs it to be. But ultimately, it's the goal is to allow teachers to find some comfort and the ability to bring this content into their classes. Um, I think more than ever, these themes really are persistent across space and time. It was true 5 years ago. It's true now. I feel certain it's going to be true, a decade from now as well. And so I think that for me, what I wanted to do was allow teachers an opportunity to really encourage interrogation of content, right? So let's talk about racism. Let's talk about issues of sexism. Let's talk about LGBTQ history, in a way that is safe for teachers to engage their students in this without fear of retribution, right? So really interrogate this topic, these contents, um, as opposed to just kind of passive consumption, which is what we had seen previously. I'd observed teachers and pre-service teachers in classrooms where they would put up a slide about Stonewall, talk about the facts of Stonewall, and then move on, right? Without really digging into, but what does this mean, right? Why did this happen? Where did we go from here? And that kind of cause and effect that I think is really missing, that critical thinking and that depth of analysis that is so important to me to instill in my pre-service teachers as well. Um, I think that it's, within the book, it's got what, 9 different sections. So each section has, 3 to 4 different lesson plans in it around, issues of gender, talking about slavery, race, LGBTQ, rights and history, Native American rights and history, rights and Native American displacement, which, as a side note, I think that was the section to me that I was most excited to see come together, because it's left out of the narrative so often. We talk about race and sexism and things like that, but what about, the history of people who had lived here before, Americans actually came to be? So there's a section on socioeconomic inequality. As an educator, it was important to me to look at education and the history of education as well. So there's a section on inequity in education, a section on child labor, which was super fun to see come together as well. And then the last section is intersectionality. So it really does weave together, lessons that tackle issues of race, gender, and class, to kind of explore how all these overlapping systems kind of work together. And again, it gives teachers tools, right? So the book was never meant to be a one size fits all, but it really is meant to allow teachers, kind of to add to their toolbox. Here are different ways that you can teach this. If it's important to you, how can you teach within the constraints of divisive issues legislation that might exist, right? Or even within district policies that now, we're seeing crop up too. So there are, I actually meant to do this and I did not. I forgot to count how many different films are that exist in this book. And I mean, there's so many, and they're so rich and so good. And I know Lucas is going to talk about his chapter here in a bit, but we've got lessons that use the help, Newsies, Hidden Figures, I Will Fight No More Forever, Imitation Game. That's just five of dozens of films that I think can be brought into classrooms to support teachers in doing this really really important work.
Yeah, and I think as the developer of the strategy, and then the series co-editor, your book, Sarah, along with Paul Yoder's book about trauma, really opened my eyes to what we could do with this strategy. Like I came up with this idea because, being from the American South, I got, bashed over the head with the Civil War my entire life, saw Gone with the Wind all the time. And then when I saw the battle scene of Atlanta, and I was like, that doesn't seem very accurate. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's very true. And it just led me, based, and we talked about in prior episodes, to coming up with this idea of, okay, cool, how can we use a primary, secondary source to help kids analyze this scene because of how popular and controversial Gone with the Wind is. And of course, I was looking more about military tactics, not necessarily as anything super deep like what you delved in with your book, and then other books in the series. And even the world history book was pretty basic. How accurate is this historical event? But you really were the first person to kind of take this idea and take it in a new and positive direction, which I found to be just exciting. And I think since your book came out, several other books in the series have gone that direction, which to me, again, as a person that kind of came up with this strategy, it was like, oh man, this is you can really take this in directions that are even more important than just determining how accurate or inaccurate a battle is. So, which has its pros and cons as well. But anyway, but yeah, but I think when I saw your book and did the soft edit of your book, I was like, man, we can really go somewhere to help teachers teach about these issues in a inquiry based manner where kids come up with their own conclusions based on evidence. And I think that is just the key component of your book, and then other books in the series as well. Yeah, so you talked a little bit about the 9 different, sections of the book, and again, you mentioned gender, slavery, race, LGBTQ+, Native American, education. So are there anything that you wanna talk about further about any of these, sections that you found as the volume editor?
I will say that when I put the call out for lessons and for to be part of the book, I had no idea what I was going to get. I had some pre-created sections already. I knew kind of what I was looking for, but I will say that I had no idea really the direction that some people were going to go, and I was so incredibly grateful for the work of all of the different authors who contributed to this volume, because I think it just made it I think when I put the original call out, I only had 5 or 6 sections in mind, but because of the different proposals that I got, I was able to really expand it, which was, I was very surprised, happily surprised about, the all of the different, possibilities that could exist within this book. And so, I think I love the idea of the education section. I think it is one of those things we talk about Brown versus the Board of Education in American history classes, but then we kind of move on, right? We don't really talk necessarily about more than that. Maybe the Little Rock Nine, and we do some work with civil rights, but not necessarily looking at modern education. And so I know Scott, the chapter that or the lesson that you all did the heroification of educators in popular films. So you use Dangerous Mind and Stand and Deliver and Remember the Titans, right? So these kind of iconic education movies in a way that I would never have put them together for this book, but it was such a really inspiring way of thinking about this is the current state of education. Here are these movies, and this is what students actually can take away in terms of the inequities that exist within the current educational system. And so I think that much like kind of when you said you put the call out for the series to grow, I was so impressed and so excited with what came back to me, because this volume, I cannot take credit for the work that all of these different authors did. I put it together and I helped to kind of, I was the brainchild behind it, But every single individual lesson that's in this book, and the way they use the film so thoughtfully and so critically and so intentionally, really just inspired me, to want to dig in even more.
Yeah, and you brought up the lesson plan I wrote, and again, this is Lucas's show, not mine. That was tough for me as an author because obviously we live in a world where teachers get bashed constantly.
Mhm.
Teachers are leaving the profession in droves. We know Michigan, we have a huge teaching shortage, and I'm a program director to help bring college educated folks into the classroom. So we really need good teachers. The last thing I want to do is bash teachers. So when I dived into that topic, I was like, oh, every word I wrote for that lesson plan was kind of to me cringy because the last thing we need to do is do anything that makes teachers look bad. But you have these Hollywood films about these educators that did really good work, where I almost think, well, just keep the facts. you know,
Yep.
the coach, remember Tyson's was kind of a jerk, but he kind of had to be. Yeah. So I kind of thought, it turned out well. So I'm glad that that made it into your book. But definitely, when it came to education for my piece, I was like, oh man, how am I going to do this? But hopefully, if you when you read Sarah's book and you do see my lesson in section 7, that no, I came from it with a place where I love teachers, I support teachers. I just wanted to see if these movie teachers how they really were in real life because I knew, knowing what I know about Hollywood film, probably not necessarily gonna be the same that they're portrayed on screen. But thanks for mentioning the Let's Play. That was a really fun one to write for me, and yeah, I'm glad it got into the book. So let's talk a little bit more about you see you brought up some of the films. So you said The Help, Hidden Figures, I Will Fight No More Forever. Anything else you want to add about some of these films that were part of your book?
Um, I don't know if there's anything specifically other than the fact that, I was just really impressed with the way the authors brought the films into the classroom, right? I mean, I would never Brave, so the Disney film Brave with the little, Scottish girl who is, the princess, and I would never have thought about using that. Um, Number one in the classroom, but also to talk about, you know, um, the marriage of young women throughout history, right? Like, and this idea of bringing that into a class to talk about, to really discuss issues of gender and marriage and kind of the class society that exists. It was really a fascinating kind of first lesson. So it jumps out right away from the book. Um, and I would, I could go on about all of these lessons, but I love just the creativity and the different sources that they were using to pair with these Hollywood films, which I thought was just so creative and so compelling, and it makes me want to go back and actually teach some of these someday.
Yeah, funny enough, Brave. I never saw the movie. Listeners, I don't see every movie that we talk about on the
Come on,
podcast.
good
But
one,
does it go in the character's name? See, I never had kids of my own, so maybe that's why. But the character's name, I don't recall. Do you know what's the character's name?
Merida.
Merida. Okay, she comes up a lot in the series. So, several different lesson plans, Brave is used. I believe World History they use Brave. And I know in an upcoming geography book that I'm doing a soft edit on now, they also
Interesting.
include Brave about how accurate the depiction of Scotland is in that cartoon. So yeah, so you'll see more
Yeah.
of Brave if you go through go through the
Well,
series
well,
along with other films.
And this one marries one of their sources is the Declaration of Human Rights. So
Hmm.
they're taking a Disney cartoon scene where they're trying to marry this girl off, and they're really pairing that with this the UN Declaration of Human Rights, which is like I would never I in my mind like I could not fathom like putting those two together, but the lesson is so beautifully written. And what a really interesting, engaging, unique way to bring that topic into a classroom.
Do you remember the author's name? So
Oh, yes, I think it was Nancy Sardone, but now I can't remember it. Yes, Nancy Sardone and, Haley Batali.
great. Yeah, just want to give them a shout out. So, and
Yeah.
Nancy was actually on a previous episode as well. So great. So I put when I had Paul Yoder on when he was talking about his book about trauma, I kind of put him on the spot, and Sarah, I'm going to kind of do the same thing to you. But can you talk a little bit more for our teacher listeners about why inequality and inequity? Give us some ideas about why this is an important topic to teach our students, especially with your book, the 6 to 12 level.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And I think, yeah, you are putting me on the spot. No, I think because um, I mean, I'm gonna actually go back like way back in the day to my teacher prep program. We read um, Lowen's very first edition of Lies My Teacher Told Me back in the day, and it opened my eyes at that point to the ways in which we teach history and the narratives that we bring into our classrooms. To me, even as a brand new baby teacher, I never wanted to be the person that relied upon the textbook. It was so problematic to me to see teachers who were only using the textbook because it was one narrative, right? It's one publisher's version of events. And so now, that has really carried me through my career to the point now where I talk a lot about about this a lot with my pre-service teachers as well. Um, and so I think, that this becomes so important because for teachers especially who do depend so much on textbook narratives, issues of inequality and inequity are absent largely from most textbooks, right? I mean, Lowen did many follow-ups with that as well, and other people have followed in his footsteps to find that the textbooks, especially U.S. history and world history textbooks, are so whitewashed. Um, and that's not acceptable to me, right? We can't teach U.S. history in a way that erases people's history and erases whole groups of people and the struggles that they went through. I am incredibly, privileged in my own upbringing and who I am currently now. Um, and we see a lot of that even in our pre-service teacher programs. And so the idea of making sure that, you know, that the students, my pre-service teachers will serve, and then, later in their own classrooms, their students are not necessarily going to be the same people that they are, right? And so knowing that they have to be culturally responsive, they have to bring in issues that may be uncomfortable, right? To talk about racism and slavery, um, that happened. We can't ignore it. And I think now more than ever, given executive orders, they're trying to erase DEI and erase entire histories of groups of people. We are erasing our students then, right? And so huge swaths of Americans are seeing their history being taken away from them, um, and which is just unacceptable. And so being able to talk about the inequity that existed throughout history and the inequality that still exists today as a result of the roots of this history, I think it's so important that we make classrooms safe places to have these conversations because it's being erased from public knowledge, or they're trying to erase it from public knowledge, right? Um, yeah, I could continue on. Something I'm very, very passionate about. But it's vital for us to move forward, right? If we forget who we have been, um, then what are we doing, right? What are we setting ourselves up for in the future? Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean that's an amazing point, and and again, I appreciate you bringing up James Lowen. He's been brought up several times on the podcast. I don't know if you know this, Sarah, but when I was um, this associate's program director for my former school district and the Teaching American History grant director, we brought him to talk to our teachers, and picked him up from the train station, and we had a lovely conversation about my dissertation, which had just finished. I had just become a doctor, and he was like, "Oh, I'd love to read it." So I sent him a copy, an electronic copy of it. He mailed me, not emailed me, but mailed me 3 handwritten pages, cover back to back, about critiquing my dissertation
Oh my
in a very
gosh.
positive way. So he and I became kind of pen pals over the last few years of his life. So yeah, so R.I.P. Jim Lowen. He did that book is amazing. It led to my dissertation as well. So it's definitely one of those seminal works that
Mhm.
for our listeners, if you haven't read Lies My Teacher Told Me, either the first edition or the following editions, certainly something that you probably want to read, especially if you're teaching, U.S. history or honestly any social studies topic. So,
Yeah.
thanks. Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit more about you, Lucas. So you wrote a lesson plan in the book, and can you talk a little bit more about the movie you selected, how you selected it, and provide us with a brief background of the film for maybe those who haven't seen it.
Yeah, of course. So thank you for saying that I wrote it, but I did co-write it
Okay.
with well, I need to give her credit. The co-author is Dr. Amy McGuffey. She was formerly at Wittenberg University, and she's my mentor, my friend, my colleague, and she helped nurture a very passionate, misdirected undergraduate student like myself into the social studies profession. So I got to give her a shout out right here because I wouldn't have even found the book without her. She reached out to me when she saw the call for proposals. And she reached out because one of the classes or one of the lessons she actually taught was how do you integrate media, including movies, TV shows, into the social studies curriculum that you're writing. So as soon as she saw the proposal for the book, she's like, "This is perfect. Now I just need to find someone in the field to write a bunch of stuff for me." And she found me, and I was willing to do it. Just like how Sarah said, "You're going to be on the podcast." Amy McGuffey said, "You're going to write this, help me write this lesson." And that's usually how it works right there. So we discussed a few films I show in class. You know, there are the usual ones people show. There's some World War II movies, Letters from Iwo Jima, Saving Private Ryan. I show Glory to scenes from that in my eighth grade American history class when we get to the Civil War. But one we found very exciting and interesting that I actually showed was Hidden Figures. Now, when I first showed it, I did not do the lesson plan that was sent in for publication. It was like I showed it, there were some questions, blah blah blah, and it was like, okay, it's the end of the year. But as Dr. McGuffey and I talked about it, we realized there was so much potential with this movie because it really does a I don't know how I'm gonna say this. It talks about race and gender barriers that are very explicit, but there's also some implicit barriers in there as well that aren't discussed. And we felt like that could really lead to a lot of great critical thinking within the movie and with our students. So, Hidden Figures, it tells a story of three brilliant African American female scientists at NASA. That's Katherine Johnson, Dorothy Vaughan, and Mary Jackson. And we're in the middle of the space race. So we're trying to beat the Russians at this point to send a man on the moon. You see in the first couple scenes that Sputnik was launched into space. So the Americans are scrambling at this point, and they need everyone to help out in this effort here. Now, there are a lot of barriers, which I already talked about, including gender, which was the focus of this chapter, and race, which would prevent these amazing women from advancing at NASA. So the movie kind of tells the story of how they're able to advance and land a man on the moon.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for the background. I know it was a very popular film. I've seen it. A lot of people have seen it. And yeah, and it's a great selection, especially when you talk about that. Not modern these days, but that more modern era in U.S. history that maybe people don't even get to. So when I was in high school, we did get past World War II, and I'm assuming that here in the on, on the street that most teachers can't get past Vietnam, but definitely a very important story and topic that does meet, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, many state standards when it comes to that period of time.
Mhm.
So great. So let's talk a little bit about the selections. So again, for the listeners, you have heard me talk about this time and time again. There are 9 steps in the Hollywood history process. Step one is selections. So you, as a teacher, if you decide to create your own lessons, which we certainly encourage you to do based on what you've heard in the podcast, you definitely want to make sure that your lesson is based on state standards. Sarah mentioned prior that we are in a different age where there is a lot of talk about removing DEI. There is a lot of pushback on certain topics in U.S. history that, according to some folks in power, do not, are talking against the United States or bad about the United States or whatever, however you want to call it, anti-American, maybe people say. So at this day and age, especially if you are a classroom teacher, you certainly want to stick to those state standards. Those state standards were approved by a group in your state, and you definitely want to make that the basis of any type of um, Hollywood history lesson that you develop. When we did the book, even prior to the way things are now, we certainly wanted to make sure those state standards were the foundation of each of these lessons. So you, as a teacher, had, if you will, the permission by your state, or at least states in the United States, to do a lesson like this. And then on top of that, you also have to pick the right clip to go along, or parts of the movie to go along with these state standards. So, Lucas, can you tell us more about the standards that you selected and some of the clips that you selected to go along with your lesson plan?
Sure. So Sarah and I actually talk about this a lot with our OCSS work. Two of the best standards in Ohio for American history are the first two standards in there. And that's because they talk about using primary and secondary source evidence to make informed conclusions about what happened historically. And those two standards are so important for educators in Ohio because we are constantly evaluating primary and secondary sources. And there's no way this curriculum that they built is going to encapsulate every primary, secondary source. So for us, it's very easy to connect to that first standard because we can connect that standard to anything we talk about in history. The standard we went with, that content wise, talks about civil rights and social change in the 1960s in Ohio. So that's found in the 10th grade American history curriculum. And then for Common Core, we also found another standard that related to using textual evidence to making informed conclusions. So with this movie, we have to remember that this is in the gender section here. So while race is going to be discussed, we definitely want to go with gender heavy clips at that point. So the one of the best scenes to start off students with is that beginning scene. If you guys have both seen the movie, they're driving in, and then their car's broken down, and then they get a sheriff or a cop behind them. And with that, there's just so much to unpack, which I'm sure maybe we'll unpack later, but that's the first scene we went with. The second scene was a scene called Glasses, where her, Catherine, and her love interest are talking, and he's kind of making some comments that say, like, well, I don't like it's amazing how a woman could do math and this and that. And she's like, well, we're not wearing skirts, we're wearing glasses. Okay, and that's how we're able to do this work. The third scene we picked is "You Are the Boss," where she's talking to Al Harrison, who's a character who's going to be very important when we talk about evaluating the accuracy of this film. So won't go into that now, but Al Harrison is very important to my students here. And she's trying to get into a meeting where she can make the calculations. And Al Harrison's just like, well, who's in charge? Who's blah, blah, blah. And she's like, you're the boss. And it's just she looks up at him and says, "You're the boss." And usually in that setting, a woman's not saying that to a man, so she's breaking a barrier into that scene. And then the last one is where she is actually doing the math and calculations in the room in front of a bunch of men in uniform, top ranking, and she's doing all of her calculations in front of him and getting it almost exact. So again, a woman in front of all these men, making all these calculations and breaking another barrier in front of them.
Yeah, and great. And you brought up the Common Core standards. Now, today, when we wrote the book, the Common Core were the or the standards, national standards, and state standards for many ELA disciplines throughout the country. Now the Common Core is kind of gone by the wayside, but Common Core is certainly still embedded in a lot of ELA standards in all states, or many states
Mhm.
actually. So when you think about Hollywood history, if you have a language arts colleague that you would like to work on a lesson plan with, definitely you can bring in these ELA elements to your social studies lesson. And then again, Lucas was nice enough to put the actual links to these clips through YouTube. So, audience, when you go to the show notes and download the PowerPoint, you will have links to these scenes that he is talking about. So, next is step two, and step two is developing an interesting question. The good thing about the Hollywood or History series, as I've said many times throughout this podcast, is you have a compelling question right there. Hollywood or
Mhm.
history? How accurate are these film clips? Is it 100% Hollywood, meaning everything about the film is fake? Is it 100% history, meaning everything about the film clip is true, like you went back in time? Or, as we've talked about, is usually somewhere in between. So yeah, so that's the one of the compelling questions that you are automatically start out with when you do a Hollywood history lesson. But certainly, authors have included additional compelling questions based on their lesson, and certainly supporting questions which will help guide your students go through the process of this analysis. So, Lucas, can you talk more about some of your questions that you wrote for this lesson plan?
Yeah, of course. So we have 3 questions, but I picked 2 out that I thought would be important for the podcast. And the first one is before the movie. What context do you think viewers need to have before watching Hidden Figures? And it all goes back to that first clip that I give people. 3 African American females broken down on the side of the road. A cop is behind them. A person without context might not feel the tension all 3 of us probably felt watching that scene right there. And that tension we feel is the context, is knowing what happens to African American females broken down on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere. So context is so critical to that. And then you move on to all these scenes about NASA, and I said Sputnik too, and they put a dog on the moon. The Soviet Union put a dog on the moon, and students are going to be like, "A dog? Wait, to the moon? Like, what year is this taking place in right here?" So context is so important to this movie because there's so much to unpack there. Like I said, there's a lot of explicit barriers in here, but there's a lot of implicit barriers as well that you need to get to the root of. And the second question focuses around the idea of stereotypes. Stereotype is one of our vocabulary words for this lesson and something we feel like students need to identify and then need to identify how the women broke through those stereotypes, maybe even create some new stereotypes that women can do something like this. So those are the 2 questions we focused on.
Yep, great. Thank you so much. And again, those questions are listed on the PowerPoint. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about selecting your sources. So again, we've discussed all three of us the importance of primary and secondary sources when doing a Hollywood or history lesson. And again, primary sources are something basically from the time period. Secondary sources, something that came after the time period. Obviously, closer to more modern history, secondary sources and primary sources kind of maybe blur a bit. So, you as a teacher, you really have to make sure that you are identifying those primary and secondary sources. Lucas, can you tell us more about the primary and secondary sources you selected for your lesson plan?
Absolutely. So primary sources, it's interviews. Interviews, diary entries, straight to the facts. I want to hear from these amazing women, and I want my students to hear from these amazing women too. So when you look through the primary sources, it is directly from their mouth what they encountered and how they were able to break through those stereotypes. So you'll see a lot of information around there, and then you'll see some primary sources from that period as well, from the civil rights movement. So videos from the civil rights movement, videos of female rights activists in the 1960s too. So we really leaned into those, and you'll see why the assignment at the end is why we really leaned into videos and interviews with them. And then the secondary sources, we went with a lot of biographies. And we actually went with a couple movie reviews in there as well that actually speak to some of the inaccuracies in the film. Again, our ending lesson is very pertinent to the curated sources I just said.
Excellent. And again, those links are provided for you in that PowerPoint. What we do next for step four is we develop a graphic organizer. And in the book series, there is a basic standard graphic organizer that I developed many years ago. We did want to make sure that every lesson plan had a graphic organizer that helped students kind of go through the process of analysis for the primary, secondary, and the film. We really wanted to make sure that they have something to kind of like collect their ideas and again help them go through the process. Some lesson plan authors have kept the original graphic organizer pretty much the same and used it. Other folks have changed it up a bit to meet the needs of their learners. So, Lucas, can you tell us more about the graphic organizer you selected for this lesson plan?
Absolutely. Keep it simple. That's what we did here. So when students are looking over primary sources, we want them to take notes on what the story is. The guiding question, of course, being Hollywood or history. So primary sources, they'll list facts on there. Secondary sources, they'll list facts on there. In the middle, they have what did they learn from hidden figures in those as well. So primary sources on the side, secondary sources on the side, and then in the middle, what happened in hidden figures. And then at the bottom there, it says, what do you think, history or Hollywood? So wanted to keep it simple there. Wanted them to explore, work in groups, discuss important points that they saw in those primary and secondary sources and that they saw in the film. And then, of course, build that main question, the main question of the book, Hollywood or history.
Excellent. And again, like I said, when I used it with my own students, it seemed to be a very easy way for them to go through this process. Analysis of these sources is not easy, especially for our eighth graders, Lucas. And again, I think this simple but effective organizer is definitely useful when it comes to that process. Okay, so now you have found the standards, you have found the sources, you have developed a graphic organizer. Now you get to actually show the film to your students or your film clips and let them start the analysis piece. So you did talk a little bit about the different scenes that you selected. Is there
Mhm.
anything else you want to add for our teacher listeners about these particular scenes to help understand the Hollywood history piece?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I want to again say that the film is flexible with if you want to focus on race, gender, or as Sarah thoughtfully added to the book, intersectionality. Because there's multiple different layers to this. Some people might see this and be like, "Wait a minute, where's the scene of Al Harrison knocking down the bathroom sign? Where's the scene of Katherine Johnson asking about the coffee pot? That very intense scene where she's soaking wet in there." So there are some really good famous clips if you want to go an intersectionality route or a race route as well. But we wanted to focus on gender in these clips here. Just like how I said, context is one of the main points of main questions we have. You need context for these video clips as well. The students are not going to understand what's going on unless you've talked about the civil rights movement before, unless you've talked about women's rights, African American rights, or anything else like that. Especially with that first scene right there, you guys heard I talked about this tension. Why do we feel this tension? Why could this be a tense scene? Why is it not a tense scene? Why is it? Why does Hollywood make it happier afterwards? So I feel like just context is really important to these. And then understanding too that no woman, African American woman, had advanced as far as they did before this, the scene that it was set into. So really focusing on this is a big barrier for them to break through. If you're just going through the clips, you got to be able to fill in the gaps with your context.
Yeah, and definitely. And again, we've told our listeners in the past that and I like your lesson having four clips. You can
Mhm.
certainly use a couple of clips. You can use all the clips. You can decide as a teacher about what clips to use. We certainly, when we wrote these lesson plans, did not intend it to be scripted, where you had to follow it step by step by step. Even though we certainly wrote it in a step by step process. So again, as a teacher, if you're using Luke's lesson or any lesson in the series, feel free to adapt it to meet the needs of your students, time frames that you may have. Maybe some schools are more lenient about some scenes over others. All those to kind of take into account when you use Luke's lesson plan or honestly any lesson plan in the series. Okay, so step six is basically our secondary source, and we've talked a little bit about textbooks and how whitewashed they may be. But what we have done in the past as a easy, simple secondary source to find information about a topic, mainly because of some of the negatives about textbooks, a small, concise kind of narrative. You can use your state mandated textbook that does probably match your state standards, or at least by this point it should as one of your secondary sources. But certainly, we want to use multiple sources to come up with our own conclusions about this topic. So there are other secondary sources that authors have selected as well for these lessons. And Lucas, you did the same thing. You did already talk a little bit about these secondary sources, but is there anything you want to elaborate on those sources that you chose?
There's one piece I want to dive into, and it's something Sarah talked about earlier. It has to do with the textbook piece. Now, she talked about how they're whitewashed and how they're inaccurate, and I completely agree with her. Textbooks are a surface level sort of reading for students to do. But I think something Sarah and I can both agree upon is that textbooks have a place in the classroom. Because textbooks can teach our students to be critical and they can teach students to be curious too. So when you're going through this, ask students to have the primary sources right next to the textbook. Ask them to have your accurate secondary sources right next to the textbook too, because you want the students to be able to break down that information and be a young historian. Look through that textbook, look for the inaccuracies, make them curious about it based on the information that they know. So, if you want to use the textbook, but use it effectively and use it to make our students better historians and not just passive bystanders in history. If I had to go back and add more to this lesson, I would add more scaffolded questions to the secondary sources. I felt like there really wasn't a place to put that in the lesson plan. As you get to the younger grade levels, especially seventh or eighth grade, those secondary sources can be a little overwhelming. So please make sure you put in scaffolded questions there just to guide them along.
Yeah, that's a great point, Lucas. I couldn't make that point better myself, even though I wrote about the effective use of textbooks early in my career. So that's great work, and I think again for any teacher, if you do have that option of a textbook, you can certainly use it, but like Lucas said, use it effectively. Don't just have your kids read it, answer some questions, and move on. If it's one of many sources, it's useful. If it's your only source, I think we can all agree on the panel, not useful at all. So definitely keep that in mind. Okay, so the next step is to analyze the primary source. And again, you talked a little bit about the primary sources that you selected, Lucas, but can you tell the listeners more about those specific sources? Anything that they should think about if they were going to use this, if they wanted to do your lesson?
Yeah, I think empathy is very important in history education and in the world too. Empathy is a big vocab word for these students. Sarah did a great job talking about how she came from a privileged background and her students might not have the same background that she does. A lot of students might not have the same background that these characters have right here. So, a capacity for empathy is important before reading these biographies because what they were doing wasn't easy at all. We tend to glorify these Hollywood movies and be like, "Oh, like they did it. That's amazing." And it only took them 2 hours too. That's not how it happened. So when you talk about these different characters here, I ask that you honor them. I ask that you honor their journeys. Not just where they start in the movie, but where they came before that and where they're gonna go after too. That's gonna be the most critical piece.
Excellent. Yeah. And again, I think, especially with historical figures who are still with us, in this more modern kind of focus, you do have that ability to watch them speak on camera, listen to their interviews, things that we may not have had with, like Genghis Khan or George Washington. So I think, when you do more modern history, you have that element. And we say use films so students can connect to historic figures from the past, but with these type of individuals, you have both their portrayal on screen as well as the actual person giving interviews and being on camera and that kind of thing, which just adds that extra layer of connection to these more modern figures than maybe some from the past. So that's a great point. So let's move on to step 8, which is the actual Hollywood or history. So again, in the book, we talk about you need to conclude your lessons where students are able to take action, do something with what they learned. And obviously, the one thing that is uniformed in all of these lessons is that at some point students have to be able to let you know how accurate they think the film clips are based on their analysis of the primary and secondary sources. Now, we're going to take a pause real quick because for our non teacher listeners, folks that may just be interested in history or may be interested in film or some sort of combination of both, they're going to want you, Lucas, to tell them how accurate you think the clips are. But we're going to put that on pause real quick. Just remember, teachers, you want your students to do that type of work. You want them to analyze the primary sources, the secondary sources, the film clips, come up with their own conclusion, and they're able to let you know what percentage they think this film is. Is it 80% history, meaning everything about it's or 80% of it is accurate, 20% is Hollywood, meaning 20% is fictional, or again, somewhere in between. But they must use evidence from your primary and your secondary sources to support their ideas. So definitely keep that in the back of your mind, teachers, when you do this type of lesson. But let's talk a little bit about your conclusion. So obviously, they will have the opportunity in the graphic organizer to write a paragraph or two about how accurate they think the film is using that continuum. And again, what I've done in the past is I've had my students actually come up to the board where I draw a continuum that says 100% history, everything about it is accurate, 100% Hollywood, everything about these clips is not accurate, or somewhere in between. Few brave volunteers come up with their paper in hand. They stand in the area of the continuum where they think the movie falls, and they let their classmates know, using evidence, how accurate they think that is. Now, that's just one of many, many, many ways that your students can take action after doing a Hollywood or history lesson. And again, many, many, many authors have adapted the idea and just gone totally different directions with it. But they're all at the end of the day having their kids do something or taking action with what they learned, which is dimension four of the C3 framework. So, for your lesson plan, Lucas, can you tell us more about your conclusions? What do your kids do after they analyze film, come up with their conclusions? Where do they go from there?
So we went with a introduction speech, which is actually like one of my favorite ways of talking about historical figures. So given their graphic organizer, the primary sources, the secondary sources, the hidden figures, what they've determined is Hollywood or history, how would you introduce this person at a dinner? How would you explain their accomplishments? How would you explain the barriers to their accomplishments too? What would that process look like? What would this person look like? What should their lasting legacy be? And I think when you think about an introduction speech, you don't want to cheapen the story. You don't want to limit their accomplishments, but it really gets you thinking and it really gets students thinking too. What's the lesson here? What's the story of this person? I talked about honoring them. How do we honor them before, during, and after this? And what note do you want to leave on for future people as well? Me and Dr. McGuffey felt like the introduction speech would get our students to actually think about what is the point of all this? What was the point of learning about these three amazing women right here? So we had students work in groups with that one. They had choices from Mary, Dorothy, Catherine, and Mr. Stafford, which we'll get to for your pinned question here in a couple slides. They'd develop like a 3-minute introduction speech. They could do it in person. They could also do it virtually as well if that made them more comfortable. And they would basically have to go over those questions I just mentioned here. What were their accomplishments? What trials did they face? What should their lasting legacy be?
Excellent. Thank you for that. And again, when you read Lucas's lesson in the book, you can certainly get more detail about how you could bring that idea to your own classroom. So,
And we put a rubric in there too
and
for
the
you guys.
rubric as well. So there's the assessment piece that you definitely will probably need if you are a teacher and want to assess what your students learned. All right, so we're at the big conclusion here, where we get to decide, where we get to be the historian, and you get to tell the audience, Lucas, how accurate you think those clips were that you selected, based on the Hollywood or history continuum. So, without further ado, what do you think?
Wow. Um, this question I'm gonna answer with my students here. Um, and it was very difficult too, because the movie does a good job in terms of a Hollywood movie. Um, Giving accurate descriptions of the women, what they accomplished, the characters involved too. But there was one sticking point my students had that really bothered them, and it was Al Harrison. Do you guys know who Al Harrison was in real life?
Oh, go ahead. Let the readers know, our listeners know.
There was no Al Harrison.
Uh-huh.
I didn't know that.
Al Harrison was what they called the government bureaucracy,
Hmm.
management. He was a representation of all of it. And a question emerges, and I wrote this question down because it's a question I asked my students, and the students asked me too. Would the movie have been more powerful without him? If he wasn't knocking down the bathroom signs, integrating the offices, doing all that work, and we just focus on how these 3 women who probably did receive help, but they willed themselves to their positions. There was no Al in there doing all of that for them. Is the movie more powerful without him? That is a stinging question to ask. And it's a question that we've been debating in my classroom for years to come. Um, and I said here while I was writing this, it was a tough question for them to answer. And while that was the students' main sticking point, it struck them in the heart. This Al character. And that's why out of the 3 options, 100%, 100%, or 50-50, we went 50-50 because they really had a big problem with that. And a question is why did they put Al in there? Why did they make up that character? Did these 3 women need this character to advance in the movie? Did it make the audience feel better about it that Al Harrison was helping them, that NASA leadership was helping them through? These are deep questions, layered questions that my students get into at the end. And I would challenge any teacher listening to ask that same question. Is it more powerful without him?
And Sarah, with your, expertise on inequality and inequity, this type of role that you put into films like this savior character or heroic character
Mhm.
or even a helper character. I'm thinking Fortune in the movie Rudy, who never existed
Right.
either. How does that impact our understanding of inequality and equity when there is this person that didn't even exist that in the film helps the real life figures that we're
Yeah.
talking
I think that's a great question. And so I definitely would be curious to see how your conversations go with your students, Lucas. But I think the bigger question is like, what would have happened had, because my, with Al at least, I mean, he's a symbol for the government, right? And so even though he specifically wasn't the person, but without the government in at that time, would these women have actually been able to move through the system the way in which they did, right? Would they have been able to make those changes kind of unilaterally? Um, I don't know that we can decipher a specific answer to that. I mean, I guess at this point, hindsight is 2020, and so maybe probably not, right? I mean, the government ultimately, they're the ones that made the changes. We look at the Kennedy administration, the Johnson administration, and all the different the Civil Rights Act, and the amount of equity that the Johnson especially was pushing. Um, and I think that without the Al Harrison character, that has to be represented in some other way, right? Because it wasn't just these 3 women, and I don't want to by any means undermine any of the work that they did through this, but the government did have a role in helping them get to where they did, right? And so I think it is important to have the symbol there. I do think it's unfortunate that it wasn't a real person, right? I mean, surely there was someone in NASA, someone in within even the Johnson administration that they could have used that was an actual real person versus just a symbol. Um, yeah, that's very interesting.
yeah.
Lucas, you kind of blew my mind today. I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, he again, like Hollywood simplifies
Mhm.
a
Right.
lot of things. Like, you know, obviously they don't have the time like I absolutely get what you're saying. They don't have the time to go through the many years of bureaucracy it probably took to make these changes. But are we short selling our students if they think segregation was ended because he put a hammer to a sign? Does
Right.
that represent the years struggle it took and the many people involved to desegregate that facility right there?
Right.
Um,
I think
so
that
it
that's the important role of the teacher then as well to help unpack that.
right,
That's why I think bringing these clips in and having those conversations is vital to understanding the realities behind it. Because if we just say, you're going to go watch this Hollywood movie, have fun, enjoy it, without actually understanding the context behind it and taking the time to do this kind of research, and as a teacher to work them through it, through this process, I think that they miss the not just the nuances, but they also come away with assumptions that are, inaccurate.
Yeah, and and Hollywood film, we haven't really discussed that yet in the podcast. We talked about artistic license, and we talked about directors and producers and writers changing things around to make it more entertaining or more dramatic or things like that. But when you do throw in these fictional people in a story that's supposed to be based on a true story, that is very problematic when it comes to using these films, especially if the students are not made aware of that. So, even though we really stress with these lessons that students come up with their own conclusions using evidence, et cetera, it's vitally important for you as a teacher to watch these films and really do the research on these films to make sure that character Joe Bob here existed and actually did something, or was that just an extra element of artistic license that you may have to discuss with your students? I think another famous example is Denzel Washington's character in Glory.
Mhm.
He was not a real person. He was
Real,
a
yeah.
fictional character placed into a real life event. And I think when it does come to determining the accuracy of films, that is something that really may pull that 100% Hollywood history more towards the center, like you said, Lucas, to 50-50 or maybe even less because of that element. So something to really think about for all educators that would like to use film in their classroom, especially when it comes to an important story like this.
I do think it's important though too that even if it is more towards the 50-50 side, or even if it's less than that, right? Like if it's just completely inaccurate, I think the conversations that happen in classrooms are still incredibly important, right? The fact that you are talking about these women, and you're talking about people who are shattering glass ceilings and breaking barriers, right? Even if the film were completely inaccurate, at least you're opening your classroom up to this conversation, and you're bringing in this content that may otherwise not have been brought in because it doesn't exist in many other places throughout our curriculum.
Yeah, and I agree, Sarah. I think when it comes to the idea of using Hollywood film in the classroom, even if something is inaccurate or not, or even completely inaccurate, the story behind it and having the kids do
Right.
this analysis using these sources, coming up with their own conclusions, doesn't really matter how accurate the film is or not. It's the process
Right,
behind it.
exactly.
And I think where you're talking about showing the stories of these women is more important, even if it was, 90%, you know, Hollywood. As long as
Mhm.
you're talking about these important topics and having your kids go through the analysis piece, that's where we're trying to go with the film.
Yeah, exactly. Which is I think the power of the method itself, right? Like it's the films become the vehicle through which the content is being taught and the conversations are being had. But ultimately that inquiry element of the lesson and being able to understand, even if it's not accurate, you can still take something away from it and you can still make an argument either for or against it based on the evidence presented and the primary sources that help you determine the factual accuracy of the film, but you're still learning the content even through that, right? It's so powerful.
Definitely. And in the future, we have my next book in the series is going to be about American history documentaries. Documentaries are supposed
Ooh.
to be, really, really accurate, but we're going to see. We're going to see how the challenges that we can have, and almost like a textbook. We think textbooks should be accurate, and we found out through Lowen's work as well as our own that they're not. I wonder how that's going to translate to these documentaries. So I love Ken Burns as much as the next guy, but Ken, we're coming for you. No, I'm just kidding. So we will see.
Well,
Um,
Scott, I think you just bring up so many great points about who is actually teaching Americans history, because there are real theories out there that movies are reaching a wider audience than history teachers. And the most pristine example, Gary Gallagher, who is out of the NAU Center at the University of Virginia, talked about Gone with the Wind and the impact that that had on our understanding of antebellum South and the Civil War too. And it's tough going up against multi-million, billion-dollar industries that are controlling a lot of the historical narratives too. So I really appreciate what you and Sarah have to say, where we need to give them the tools to unpack those narratives.
Yeah, and it's not an American problem. Being from the American South, you don't know how many tourists came to Atlanta looking for Tara. That
Yeah.
never existed. So yeah, so definitely something to consider. Well, y'all did a good job of providing us with some references and materials, and you have access to that PowerPoint as well. And yeah, so we're going to conclude, but I would like both Sarah and Lucas talk about what you're doing now. Anything to promote, anything to plug, any writings, any presentations, anything going on outside the world of Hollywood history that you'd like to tell our audience about? Sarah, we'll start with you.
Sure. I mean, I keep busy, obviously. I'm definitely not lacking for projects. Um, I think the thing I'm most excited about right now, with the consulting company that I started with one of my colleagues, we are working on a new method called micro inquiries, and they are small, bite-sized inquiries, 4 sources you can unpack in 15 minutes or less. So it really is being able to take inquiry, which obviously is what the Hollywood or history method is based in, but make it a little bit more accessible in a smaller amount of time. So there are 4 different sources. There's an argument, there's a task, um, a compelling question still, and so I'm actually working on doing some work around that. We've had an article published in Social Education, a new one's coming out in social studies in the young learner in October. So right around the time this podcast actually comes out, I'll have an article in SSYL with some great some sample lessons, and then I'm working on a book as well along with that. So some really great opportunities for teachers to continue to build inquiry into their classroom. I think in this age of challenging times that we live in classrooms. One of the big things that teachers are afraid of is bringing in some of these bigger, more controversial topics. Using inquiry is a great way to do that because it forces your students to bring in multiple perspectives and then use those perspectives to kind of create an argument, and then defend it using the evidence from the primary sources. So that's kind of my big project at the moment that I'm working towards.
Great. And audience members, we've talked about this before. Social Education is the flagship practitioner journal for the National Council for the Social Studies. Very, very difficult to get something in that journal. So congratulations about that. And
Thank
then
you.
SYL is the Social Studies and the Young Learner, which is also the elementary kind of version of social education written for elementary school teachers through NCSS. And again, not easy to get something into that journal as well. So congratulations, Sarah. That's great. I look
Thanks.
forward to reading it. And Lucas, so basically, we're recording this in June. You're probably going to be hearing it in October. So by the time you hear this, Lucas will be back at work. But other than enjoying some time off for the summer, anything going on with you as far as any work that you're doing with social studies education?
Absolutely. So I actually have two nerdy trips planned for this summer. I'll be going to the Sphere Summit in Washington, D.C. from the Cato Institute. John Snowd, who was a educator in Ohio, helps lead that. And he also shows up to
Yes,
OCSS
he
every year
does. He's
too.
already registered.
Um, so I'm really excited to go to that. And then I have another professional development at Ford's Theater this summer.
Mm.
So I'll be able to go there. We're also going to Frederick Douglass's house during that institute as well, and a bunch of other Civil War sites. I have a couple conference presentations coming up. I hope I don't lose part of your audience here, but it has to do with AI,
Oh,
AI and
of
social
course.
studies, and how I'm using it to integrate into social media templates. So, for example, when we did the Bill of Rights this year, my students created a Bill of Rights album where they had to design a song cover that represented each amendment in the Bill of Rights. and they had to put it together. And a couple of them even made songs using AI that talked about each one as well. I've made YouTube videos using AI or YouTube templates. I've had students interact with historical figures on AI to create Instagram posts. So it's been a lot of fun, and that will be at OCSS this year. And I've applied to a few others, but haven't heard back yet. But hopefully, a few others after that. But yeah, besides that, returning to the eighth grade classroom, returning to Sarah's executive board on the Ohio Council for the Social Studies, I just encourage social studies teachers, even non-social studies teachers in here, reach out reach out to your social studies boards, reach out to your legislators. If there's something that I have a lot of respect for my organization for and for Sarah for, is that we don't take left or right, we don't take red or blue, we take good social studies instruction. And I firmly believe that social studies instruction is the bedrock of American democracy. And most importantly, K through 6 social studies education is very, very important. And we need to invest in it, and we need to legislate for it, and we need to be advocates for it as well. I don't blame my students, I don't blame former teachers, but I have kids that come into 8th grade and they struggle with the 3 branches of government. And I don't blame those within the system, I blame those operating the system, and we need to change it for the better. So I'm excited to team up with Sarah for the next year, and advocate for good social studies instruction, which is not only what this country needs, not only what Hollywood or history needs, but what our citizens need too. So yeah.
Excellent. And again, not to poke any fingers, but maybe some of our current political leaders don't know what the three branches of government is either. So we will see. But since I have a bunch of Ohio folks, and for my Ohio audience, hopefully
Oh
you'll bring
boy.
some folks from Ohio.
Yeah.
When is your state conference normally? Can you tell us some
Yes.
dates for your state conference?
So this year is October 13th and 14th, 2025. Though typically it is usually right around that time every year. So in October, and it's held in Columbus. So just north of the city, easy to get to. It's central in the state. People coming from out of state can fly into Columbus. It's an easy Uber ride up to the Nationwide Conference and Event Center.
Tell them
It's
the
been
guest speaker,
growing.
Sarah.
What's that?
The guest speaker you got.
This year's guest speaker, we have Dr. Judy Pace, who's going to come in and totally rock our worlds, with talking about all of the work that she's doing, and how as teachers you can continue to do the good work you're doing even in the midst of the political climate we live in currently. So I'm so excited to have her come. She's such a phenomenal researcher, teacher, activist. So I know our teachers are going to learn a huge amount from her. So
And we play trivia
we
during the conference as well,
we
and it
do
gets
have a trivia night.
very intense. So, even if you don't show up to the conference, which we want you to, show up for trivia.
Mhm. Scott, you should come down to Ohio. It's
Eh,
great.
yeah, hey, I'll take the invite. I'll come down. But, not too far away. And again, yeah, this is gonna be perfect because when this comes out, it's gonna be very close to your conference. So any of the listeners, please, if you're in Ohio or are nearby, go check out their conference. I know that y'all do some great work down there. And yeah, it's great. It's great having you. And also going back to AI, just tell you how the sausage is made for the podcast. So our amazing theme song, which y'all haven't heard, but you will when you hear this, was AI generated. So I wanted to use the movie The Last Mohicans, that string little song they have throughout the movie. Did not get the rights for that. I
Uh,
also wanted to close out with a very similar sounding song from one of my favorite indie bands called the Everybody Fields. Did not get the rights for that either. So we are going to basically just use AI, and AI did an amazing theme song. So when you hear the Hollywood History podcast, which you'll hear soon because the first one drops today, and definitely you'll be able to hear the work that AI can do. I'm actually proud of that song. I had nothing to do with it other than the right. I think he took the cover of my book and and the AI run with it. So there you go. And also, just before we let you go, we are going to. If you have any questions for Lucas or Sarah about the book, the lesson plan, anything that they're doing now, there is a email address. It is Hollywood or History Podcast at gmail.com. Once again, Hollywood or History Podcast at gmail.com. And not to speak for you both, but I'm sure if we have any questions from the listeners or the viewers, that you'll be happy to answer those questions when they're sent to us.
Absolutely.
Of course.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being here. That was a great conversation about Hidden Figures. Thank you for your hard work with the Hollywood History series, and I look forward to hopefully you all contributing some more lessons down the road.
Thanks, Scott.
Hollywood History volumes are now published by Emerald Publishing out of the UK. All volumes can be purchased on Emerald's website or anywhere books are sold. If the innovative ideas discussed in the podcast have led you or a family member to consider earning an undergraduate or graduate degree in education from Central Michigan University, we encourage you to review the links in the show notes or contact host Dr. Scott Roberts at rober4s@cmich.edu. We offer undergraduate degrees in general and special education at the elementary level, secondary disciplines including social studies, and graduate degrees in curriculum and instruction, instructional technology, literacy, health and PE, and special education. We also have accelerated teacher certification programs for those with undergraduate degrees in something other than education who want to become excellent teachers in the state of Michigan.